Welcome to the Project Chana Power Hour podcast. This is a project at mikvah.org and Neshei Chabad. We encourage you to set aside 1 hour each week to learn about the 3 mitzvahs of women. In this hour, we delve into 20 minutes on Shabbos, 20 minutes on the topic of kashrus, and 20 minutes on Taras HaMishpacha. Together, let's elevate our homes and prepare ourselves to greet Mashiach. And here's an opportunity for you to actively participate and support this initiative. Consider sponsoring a week of learning. Reach out to us at projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com to sponsor an episode. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy today's recording.
Welcome back to Project Chana Power Hour. Each week we get together to learn and strengthen ourselves in our special mitzvahs of Kashrus, Shabbos, and Taras HaMishpacha, as well as other halachos that are pertinent to women. Our goal is to prepare ourselves in our homes to welcome Mashiach. Tonight's learning is dedicated to Iloi Nishmas Harav Yitzchak ben Harav Eliezer Tzvi Zev Alav Shalom. May his neshama have an aliyah. If you would like to dedicate a class in honor or zechus of someone, please reach out via our email to projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. Please join us afterwards for Tzedakah Tehillim and a Mashiach thought. We want to make an important announcement that next week will be Lag BaOmer on Tuesday, so we will not be having our program. Be'ezus Hashem, we look forward to resuming on the following Tuesday. Now, for our first class on Shabbos, we are excited to continue with part 2 of our series on the halachas of Haitza'ah, carrying, with Rabbi Broin. Rabbi Broin is the Moreh D'Asra of Crown Heights. Thank you so much for making time to be on our program.
Okay. I want to recap. I don't usually do this, but I want to recap a bit of the last few minutes of last week's class, only because it's very hard to continue this week without the last few minutes of last week's class. These 20 minutes are very, very precious, so I try to make sure that we get the most out of them, but it needs to be clear and understood. So a lot of the halachas of carrying have to do defining the reshuyos, the different forms of domains that exist according to the Torah. I want to go through this very briefly, because I want to focus more on the halachas of carrying, but it's impossible to understand the halachas of carrying without understanding the nature of the 4 different domains. And once you understand the domains, you understand the idea of why people in their courtyards need to make a native, why around cities there's particular structures, and whether that works and doesn't work and how that works. But that's not the gist of what the shir is about, and especially when it comes to cities, because that's negated to the bottom of the city. But just give the basic idea. So in the Torah, we have 4 types of domains. We have something called the Reshus HaYachid, a private domain, and a Reshus HaRabim, a public domain. A Karmelis, a domain which is in between, and a Makam Tur, a domain which is totally exempt and doesn't have any halachic status. So as far as the Torah is concerned, we don't have this idea of a Karmelis. The Karmelis was a rabbinic addition that was added later, something which is not a private domain, not a public domain. What do I mean when I say private domain versus public domain? A private domain in the Reshus HaYachid does not mean that it belongs to one person. It means a closed-off area which is made for people to live in, and it has certain conditions. It has walls. We spoke last week, the halachas about these walls, how tall they have to be. They have to be tall of 10 tefachim. They have to have a space within a space besides for the walls. They have to have a space of 4 by 4 tefachim, which is a chash of a place. 4 by 4 tefachim is about 12.6 inches by 12.6 inches. Walls, space, small space of 4 tefachim in between, and that's the general idea of Reshus HaYachid. Now, you could have a lot of Reshus HaYachid which have 3 walls, and it's open on the 4th wall. A lot of alleyways between 2 houses are like that. A lot of people in front of their homes, it's like that. And then we have to talk about when it's open, the 4th wall is open, where is it open to? Is it open to a public domain, to a street? Is it open to a Karmelis? And how do you make sure that you could carry on your porch, in your backyard, by fixing up that 4th wall? And that's what we spoke a lot about last week. And from there we move on to the Reshus HaRabim. But before we go to the public domain, the Reshus HaRabim, a Reshus HaYachid, once a place is a Reshus HaYachid, the airspace above the Reshus HaYachid, in halacha we call that Avid Reshus HaYachid. So above, in my porch, assuming my porch is the Reshus HaYachid, has all the rules, it has 4 walls all around it, everything is taken care of. Now, if you want to carry high up, even though the Reshus HaYachid needs 10 tefachim of walls, 10 tefachim about 9.5 about 31 inches, 31 and a half inches. So above those 10 tfachim, even in the air, all of that, Rishus HaYachid, Oila Adler Rekia, Rishus HaYachid goes all the way up to the sky. So anything above the Rishus HaYachid is considered Rishus HaYachid. Well, the Rishus HaRabim has different rules. It works very, very differently. Now, this Rishus HaYachid, this private domain, could be on an object. It could be hanging in the air. You can have a dish standing in a public street in the Rishus HaRabim, and if this dish has within it 4 by 4 tfachim, and it is tall 20 tfachim, then like a closet. You can have a closet in the middle of a Rishus HaRabim. This closet has a din of a Rishus HaYachid, and above the closet, all the way to the sky, Adler Rekir has a din of a Rishus HaYachid. We could talk about what if it's 4 tfachim, but it's not tall 10. I don't want to go through all those details. We could talk about a keli, a closet, but it's not attached to the ground. If it is attached to the ground, it's getting very, very technical. I don't think that's relevant for most people that are learning about the practical day-to-day halachas about carrying. In contrast to a Rishus HaYachid, we have a domain called the Rishus HaRabim. Rishus HaRabim is an area, a way, a pathway, which was made for the public. Rechoivei, streets. I'm going to use English terms, although the terms are not necessarily accurate translations. Rechoiv means a street. That's how you translate Rechoiv in English, but our streets are very different than their streets, positively, negatively, in so many different ways. But just like spiritually, our streets are not necessarily as clean as they were in those days. So in the olden days, you would have paths that went from one city to another city. Those were considered Rishus HaRabim, Shvakim, markets. Those pathways are all considered a Rishus HaRabim, provided it has the regular conditions. Halacha refers to these places as Sratya and Platya. Sratya is a place where the public walk. It's a Derech HaMelech. It's called Derech HaMelech. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a king's way. It's the main way, the main street, the highway, the main street. And Platya is a place where everybody gets together. It's more like a plaza, where everybody gets, it's a very similar word to the word Platya in Aramaic, plaza, where everybody gets together to do business. Those are considered the Rishus HaRabim places. Now, in order for some to be Rishus HaRabim, there are certain conditions attached to it. There's a lot of opinions about this, but I'm getting the general gist of it. A street to become a Rishus HaRabim needs to be at least 16 amma, about 25 feet. The reason why it needs to be 16 amma, because the Machane Levia, the camp where the Levites camped in the Midbar in the desert, was that size. The halacha of carrying we learn from the Mishkan, where it says, we spoke about this last week, that Moshe Rabbeinu gave an instruction that no man or woman should do any more work for the Mishkan, because they all were donating to the Mishkan. They donated a bit over the top. Like I said last week, Halavai, our fundraisers would have that problem that people donate way too much. And the announcement came from Moshe Rabbeinu, Al Yasu Oid Malacha, do not do any more work. That means carrying, bringing your donations to the Levium is considered work. The Levium, Moshe was in the area of Machane Levi, and Moshe said, don't come to my camp with your donations. The Machane Levi had a din of Rishus HaRabim. Moshe Rabbeinu told him, don't come from your house and bring it to my area, from your tent, from your areas, to my area. Moshe Rabbeinu's area is Rishus HaRabim. Moshe and that area of the Machane Levi was 16 amma wide, 25 feet approximately. Therefore, we know for north to be Rishus HaRabim, it can't be too narrow of a road. It can have a roof over it. If it has a roof on top of it, it also wouldn't be considered a Rishus HaRabim. It can have a wall around it, if there's a wall around the street. And if there is a wall around the street, then it needs to be the doors is a walled city. There's a way to get into the city. Otherwise, what's the purpose of the wall if you can't get in or can't get out? The openings of the wall need to be correspond parallel to each other. If it does have a wall, so if there's an opening on one way in one part of the wall, and then not parallel to it is another opening, in that way it's not called a Rishus HaRabim because it's not made for thorough, straightforward, mefulash, smooth, and open walking. For people to traverse, to go through the street, if they can't go through the street normally, they're coming through in the wall of the city, and then it's not a straight road. So in such a case, when they have to go through the wall, again, it wouldn't be considered a Rishus HaRabim. So the typical street seems like would be a Rishus HaRabim, a public domain. But here comes a very interesting halacha. That is an opinion that says which is not found in the Gemara, but there's an opinion that says that in order to define the Reshus Rabim, Yesh Oimrim, there's an opinion that says there needs to have 600,000 people passing the street on a daily basis. If there are no 600,000 passing, it's not called a Reshus Rabim, it's called a Carmelis. It already goes one level down, which is biblically Minator, not considered. The halachas of carrying do not apply to a Carmelis, they only apply from a Reshus Hayachet to a Reshus Rabim. Private to public, public to private, or within a public domain carrying something for 4 amas. If it's a Carmelis, it's a lower level. So there's an opinion that says that in order to be considered a Reshus Rabim, you need to have 600,000 people there. Why? Because there were 600,000 Jewish men in the desert. And from there we learned halachas Reshus Rabim. The other opinion disagrees. Yesh oimrim like this, v'yesh chok, and some disagree. Now, I don't want to go into these became a lot of the subjects of controversy when it came to local Eruvs in many communities of old. I'm talking about not modern day controversies, but ancient controversies going back a couple hundred years. And I don't want to go into those halachas. That's not relevant directly to our shir, but it's good for important for general knowledge. A major discussion is whether we measure these 600,000 people. How we measure Jews and non-Jews. That ever writes clearly non-Jews are counted. Today's day and age of controversies, do we measure people in cars? We don't count people in cars, only people that are walking every day. The Alter Rebbe writes B'chol Yom, like many Rishonim say every single day. Do we count them per street, per city? There's so much to talk about all of this. The Alter Rebbe writes, this is a Poskim, right? It's based on Shulchan Aruch and Poskim, that the minig became, all the Eruvin that are made are based on the minig, according to the opinion that nowadays we don't have a proper Reshus Rabim, because there's no 600,000 people traversing our streets nowadays, the Poskim, right, in those days. And therefore, people have followed the opinion that's not a Reshus Rabim. How does it help people that it's not a Reshus Rabim? You can't carry in a Carmelis also. So the answer is because in some cases it could be a difference if it's forbidden in HaTorah to carry or forbidden in the Rabbanan. And one practical example before I move further is how to make a Reshus Rabim kosher for carrying. So if it's a Reshus Rabim, a public domain, you need to enclose it, the entire area, with doors. Whereas if it's a Carmelis, and in between stage, you can enclose it with Tzudas HaPesach with door frames. You put up a stick and another stick and a rope on top, and that's a door frame. You don't need actual doors. And perhaps if you have doors, you might have to close the doors. Well, not all the time, and maybe at night you close the doors. Again, I'm not going into all of those halachas. So in many places where they did erect what people call Eidiv, although that's a misnomer, the right word is not Eidiv, they erected mechitzos, they erected walls or door frames. The discussion was whether this is really a Reshus Rabim, what type of structure would be required to be able to carry there. So the Alter Rebbe brings there is a minig that we follow the position, there became a minig to be lenient, that it's not a Reshus Rabim. Now, those who follow this minig, ein limchis biyadam, they should not be protested against, because they have what to rely on. Now, this is not only, the issue about an Eidiv is not only surrounded around this, I'm just mentioning this aspect because that's directly relevant to carrying. These people have who to rely on. He doesn't say you should rely on this opinion, that we do rely. He says we shouldn't protest because they have what to rely on. But every God-fearing person should be stringent for himself and not rely on this opinion, because there's two opinions. If do we need Shishim Rib at all? According to one opinion, it's all about 16 amma wide and not about the amount of people that traverse in the street. And according to another opinion, it depends on how many people traverse the street. But to give a practical example, alleyways that we have over here in Crown Heights, that go from one street to another, the narrow alleys, those are not wide 16 amma. So even if we would have a Rabbim Boikenpem, there'd be a lot of people going through. I don't even know how many people go through those alleyways. Usually it's only people that live on the block. Most people, they want to walk from one street to another. They don't go through an alleyway, they go through the street. But even if we would have a lot of people traversing there, we can make a Tzudas HaPesach, a door frame in those alleyways, because they don't have 16 amma, so they're not wide 25 feet, most of the alleyways that I looked at, and therefore we could put the Tzudas HaPesach, a door frame, we need to make an Eidiv, collect food, whatever, but again, we're not talking about halachas of Eidiv right now, and that could work. But a place that has 16 amma, now the question is it a Reshus Rabim or not? Or maybe because there's no 600,000 people. So I started mentioning that the Alter Rebbe writes that those who follow the position that it's based on 600,000 people should not be protested against. It is not clear, by the way, which opinions the Alter Rebbe hold primarily of. And we can argue this way and that way, and there's proof from the Tzemach Tzedek one way, from the Rebbe another way, and again, we're not going to go into that right now. Is the primary opinion that is based on 16 Amo, or is the primary opinion the one that, no, it's not only 16 but also needs to have 600,000 people passing by? Or is the one a main opinion, the other one what became the minig? The minig in cities in Europe is that people did not care for follow the position that 600,000 people, if it's not a Rosh Hashanah, which is the primary opinion. We have sometimes, Alter Rebbe writes somewhere, Ein lanu koyach limchos. We have no koyach to protest because he has what to rely on. If somebody's following a legitimate position, we don't have the ability to protest. That sort of implies less of acceptance. Sometimes we don't protest because they're right. Sometimes we don't protest because that's the minig. And the minig has justification. Again, I'm not going into that discussion. That's something which a lot of literature has been written about that. The Alter Rebbe writes over here, every God-fearing person should be stringent for himself. But if you look carefully in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the way it's worded is like this. Alter Rebbe says that these opinions that say it's based on 600,000 people, we shouldn't protest. Why shouldn't we protest? Because this is the position of Gedoyle HaRishonim, of great Rishonim. Their reason is not found in the Gemara. But the Chol Yerushalayim, Yachal God-fearing person should be stringent. The Bavram Chaim Noah, one of the Lubavitcher Rabbanim in the previous generation, wrote this wording is very, very strange, and he has a lot of questions on the wording. And he suggests that maybe the wording should be slightly different. And there's probably a typo in here. And he says, the Alter Rebbe would say, their reason is not, this is their opinion, but the reason is not in the Gemara, but a God-fearing person should be stringent. He says a more smooth reading would be, every God-fearing person should be stringent because this is the opinion of Mendel Rishonim, the opposite. The Mendel Rishonim goes on why should he be stringent. And the reason why Mendel Rishonim say this, because there's nothing in the Gemara about 600,000. It's nowhere in our Gemara, this rule, this condition for Rosh Hashanah. That's just a technicality, how to read the words of the Alter Rebbe. The meaning, general meaning is the same. There's another point that Rav Chaim makes, and he says he looked in different prints, whether the words Yerushalayim Yachmal Atzmai is in parentheses, it's not in parentheses, it's written by the Alter Rebbe, not written by the Alter Rebbe. Other poskim write the words Hamachmer Yachmal Atzmai. Whoever is strict should be strict for himself. Some of them write the Alter Rebbe's lashon is Kol Yerushalayim Yachmal Atzmai. It's a slightly different lashon. He argues it's possible that Alter Rebbe didn't write this. Possible that Alter Rebbe's brother, who made comments on the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, wrote it. He was also an authority, and the reason he wrote that every Yerushalayim should be machmer because this is what he saw in the Alter Rebbe's home. Continues, Rav Chaim Noah says, I'm not suggesting because of that the Yerushalayim should be lenient. I just want to work out what's the correct wording of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Be that as it may, the Tzemach Tzedek already also writes the words Yerushalayim Yachal Latzman, and Tzemach Tzedek is for sure an authority for us, so whether these are the words of the Alter Rebbe or not, just a discussion about that and just putting that out there. Now, I want to mention something very, very important over here. And there's a sikh of the Rebbe, which is probably very, very relevant to this topic. The Rebbe once spoke about the fact, it's a sikh, you could hear it on tape, it's on audio, to Yud Beis Tammuz Tavshim Mem Hei Farbringen. The Rebbe spoke about people who misuse this halacha, this particular halacha. The context of the sikh was about Sheva Mitzvah B'nei Noach, and people ask a foolish question in the Rebbe's words. The Rebbe said, they ask, why don't we find a poskim that they talk about that people should go encourage others to keep Sheva Mitzvah B'nei Noach? So the Rebbe says, let me give an analogy and you'll understand. You can't always learn from what happened before because you need to know the facts on the ground. So the Rebbe gave an example that many Rishonim say that if you don't have 600,000 people, it's not Rosh Hashanah. And therefore the poskim write, the Alter Rebbe brings this, that nowadays we don't have a proper Rosh Hashanah because we don't have in our street 600,000 people. So someone nowadays, not in the time of the Alter Rebbe, will come and say, in his city, which for sure has 600,000 people, and they'll say, well, the Shulchan Aruch says there's no Rosh Hashanah nowadays. And therefore, it says in the Shulchan Aruch, Achshav ein lan Rosh Hashanah, it means it can never ever again be Rosh Hashanah. Even though the guy himself counted how many people pass in the city, or the police counts how many people pass the city, and we see clearly there are more than 600,000 people. He says, no, but the Shulchan Aruch says there's no Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe says it's so foolish, we can laugh about this. The Shulchan Aruch was giving you a chayk, was giving you some exedus hakasav. The Shulchan Aruch was talking about a reality which existed in the time of the Shulchan Aruch, where then in those days it wasn't possible to have Shishim Ribi passing every single day, and therefore the halacha became that there's no Rishus Harabim bizmanenu. But now there's the things have changed, and cities do have Shishim Ribi. Of course, it's a Rishus Harabim gemurim ben atoyde b'lishum pikpuk. We can't even argue about it. We can't just take the words of Shulchan Aruch achshav ein Rishus Harabim without looking at the context. So that's an important general rule in life, how to apply halacha to Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is talking about a certain reality, and you have to find if that reality still exists today. Shulchan Aruch doesn't only talk about halachas, but tells you how those halachas apply in reality. In this particular case, the Rebbe says the way the Shulchan Aruch applies the halacha to the reality of those days was in those days there was no Rishus Harabim. Nowadays, of course, there are Shishim Ribi people. What is the Rebbe talking about when he says the Shishim Ribi people today? So I mentioned before, there's an argument if it goes per street, per city. In this Sikha, the Rebbe used the word street a few times, but clearly when the Rebbe was talking about the idea that today they are Shishim Ribi, he's talking about not streets, because the cities today have Shishim Ribi, not streets as far as we know. The Rebbe was using the term in halacha, the chayvus, which could be all the streets together, which could be just a general term referring to the city. So Paiskim already write this. Chacham Tzvi seems to imply that in England it was a Rishus Harabim. The Beis Ephraim, which was a very, very pro-Eidov Paisik a couple hundred years ago, he argues very strongly about that the condition for Rishus Harabim is Shishim Ribi 600,000 people. And he says even those who don't mention that, it's not because they're against it, because these Rishonim didn't mention it, because they lived in big cities, which they all had 600,000 people, and therefore the issue was irrelevant. In France, in Germany, like for example, he gives examples of Paris, London, Frankfurt, all these big cities, of course, have a din of Rishus Harabim. So he clearly looks at the city. And he was, like I said, one of the pro-Eidov Poskim. Reb Chaim Oizer says that Paris is for sure a proper Rishus Harabim, because there's 600,000 people in Paris, even though it's not in every single street. The Divrei Malkiel writes that in a city of Shishim Ribi, even if not every street has 600,000, it's hard to be lenient. The Minchas Elazar talks about London, Paris, Vienna, Berlin. Modern Poskim talk about New York, Manhattan, big cities. Paris, London, New York, all it's very hard to accept they're not a Rishus Harabim. Again, there are opinions that say differently. I'm not going to that topic. I'm just putting that context here. We'll continue with Shem next week, although we're still in the middle of a topic.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Brian. For our next class on Taharas HaMishpacha, we are excited to continue with part 2 on the halachas of keeping a calendar with Mrs. Chaya Klein. Mrs. Klein is the administrator of mymikvahcalendar.org and a long-time certified color teacher. Thank you so much for being part of our program tonight.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you, all of you, for joining us for part 2 of the Einas Haveses, the laws of the mikvah calendar. Last week, we discussed the basic essentials of what is necessary to understand the calendar and make the required calculations. Namely, the laws of the calendar are halacha, not chumrah, and not minhag. Only the Hebrew luach may be used for these calculations. We have to remember that each Hebrew date begins at sunset one day and ends at sunset the next day. Each Hebrew date consists of 2 onos, 2 time frames, the night ona from sunset to sunrise, and the day ona from sunrise to sunset. A bedika is required to be performed on each ona of separation. All of the harchakas are not required to be maintained on the onus of separation since one is not nida. However, marital relations are not permitted, and hugging, kissing, sleeping in the same bed, even fully clothed, should be avoided. The date and time the period begins and the date that the hefsek tahara is successfully completed are required for calendar calculations. Therefore, the hefsek tahara should always be done as soon as halachically permissible, as long as your bleeding has stopped. If mikveh is delayed, and we only delay mikveh for a valid reason, and a rav should always be consulted if mikveh has to be delayed, the calculations will not be affected or changed at all. 3 cycles beginning in a specific pattern may establish a kavua. A rav should be consulted. We need to separate in anticipation of the start of the period according to 3 methods of calculation. One is the Veses HaChodesh, the monthly cycle. One is the Ona Beinanis, the average cycle. And one is the Veses HaFloga, the interval cycle. Tonight, we will go into the details of each of these 3 methods of calculation to understand fully how they are made. Let us begin with the Veses HaChodesh, the monthly cycle. We separate and anticipate the period to begin on the same Hebrew date and the same Ona, night or day, as the previous period began. The separation for the Veses HaChodesh is one Ona of separation, corresponding to the Ona upon which the period began that created this Ona. Example, period begins on the day Ona of the 5th of Elul. We mark the day Ona of the 5th of Tishrei as a time to separate and anticipate that the period may begin. This is the Veses HaChodesh. When you get to the 5th of Tishrei, if your period has not begun, you will separate intimately from sunrise to sunset on this date. A Bedika is required to be done just after the time of day that the period began that created this Ona of separation, but before the end of the Ona. Example, if the period on the 5th of Elul began at 10 a.m. and you come to the day Ona of the 5th of Tishrei, did not get your period, you are required to do a Bedika after 10 a.m., but before sunset, Shkia, on the 5th of Tishrei. Please remember that the separation continues throughout the entire Ona, that's sunrise to sunset on the 5th of Tishrei, even if the Bedika is done earlier in the day and is clear. Consult the Rav if a Bedika was not done for the Veses HaChodesh. Do this the first time that it happens, and then ask the Rav if you may rely on this psak if it happens again, or if you need to ask anew each time. According to all Chabad Rabbanim, if a Veses HaChodesh date is passed free of any bleeding, it is cancelled. There is, however, a difference of halachic opinion between our own Chabad Rabbanim on what to do if the Veses HaChodesh date is not passed blood-free. One Shita, Rabbi Yekusiel Farkash and Tarak Halacha, holds the opinion that if a Veses HaChodesh Ona falls within the days of a flow, it is cancelled. This means that in our example, if the period began on the day Ona of the 5th of Elul, we mark the day Ona of the 5th of Tishrei as the Veses HaChodesh time of separation. However, the next period begins on the day Ona of the 3rd of Tishrei, and this is quite common for any woman who has a cycle that is 27, 26, 28 days apart, etc. She therefore is not going to be able to pass the 5th of Tishrei blood-free because she's in the middle of her period. According to this Shita, the day Ona of the 5th of the Chodesh is now cancelled by the newer period and is no longer suspect. We will then mark only the day Ona of the 3rd of Cheshvan as the new Veses HaChodesh date of separation for Cheshvan, based on the cycle that began on the day Ona of the 3rd of Tishrei. Therefore, Rav Farkash and other Rabbanim hold the halachic opinion that the Veses HaChodesh is cancelled two ways. One, cancelled when it's passed blood-free, or two, it's cancelled if it falls within the days of a period. The second Shita, Rav Heller, Rav Yosef Heller, and Kitzur Dinei Tahara, and other Rabbanim, hold that because the Veses HaChodesh of the day Ona of the 5th of Tishrei was not passed blood-free, since it was within the days of the period that began on the 3rd of Tishrei, it needs to be carried forward. We can't cancel it. Therefore, for Cheshvan, there will be two Veses HaChodesh dates of separation marked onto the calendar. One, the day Ona of the 3rd of Cheshvan, corresponding to the period that began on the day Ona of the 3rd of Tishrei. And two, the day Ona of the 5th of Cheshvan, which is a Chodesh date carried forward from the period that began on the 5th of Elul, because it was not passed blood-free on the 5th of Tishrei. Now, according to this second Shita of Kitzur Dinei Tahara, it would therefore be very common for a woman to have several Veses HaChodesh dates on her calendar at any given time. However, don't stress, the same reason that her cycles are creating these onos, namely that her period begins a day or days earlier each cycle, will be the same reason that the carried dates will fall out when she is already nida anyway. Eventually, they'll move forward and they will fall within the Sheva Nakim, the 7 clean days, at which point they will be passed blood-free and then they will be cancelled. Both of these shitas are 100% correct. It is simply a matter of which halachic opinion you follow. If you are uncertain which shita to follow, please consult your own Rav. Even according to the first shita of Rav Farkash, there may still be occasions when you can have more than one Veses HaChodesh date on your calendar. Example, let's say that your period began on the day Ona of the 5th of Elul. You mark the day Ona of the 5th of Tishrei as your Veses HaChodesh Ona of separation. However, you then had a new period 3 weeks later on the day Ona of the 26th of Elul, and this can happen, though hopefully not too often. In any case, according to all Shitas, you would still maintain the day Ona of the 5th of Tishrei as a Veses HaChodesh date, but you will also mark the day Ona of the 26th of Tishrei as an additional Veses HaChodesh date. This is because you did not yet get to the 5th of Tishrei to cancel it, nor did it fall within the days of this new cycle of the 26th of Elul. Therefore, it remains on your calendar, giving you 2 Veses HaChodesh dates for the month of Tishrei. In this example, the day Ona of the 5th of Tishrei will fall within the Sheva Nekim of the cycle of the 26th of Elul, and it'll then be canceled as being past blood-free and will not be carried forward, while the 26th of Tishrei will remain on the calendar, and we have to wait and see what happens. To quickly recap, the Veses HaChodesh is a separation on the same Hebrew date and the same Ona, night or day, as the previous period began. It is one Ona of separation, night or day. A Badika needs to be performed just after the time the period began that created it, but before the end of the Ona, and consult a Rav the first time that you forget to do the Badika. It is canceled if it is past blood-free. The separation is the entire Ona, even if the Badika is done earlier in the day and is clear. There are 2 halachic opinions about what to do if it is not past blood-free. One opinion says it is canceled if it falls within the days of the period, and the second opinion says it is carried forward monthly until it is actually past blood-free. The second way that we need to calculate and anticipate the start of the period is called the Ona Beinanis. This is the average cycle. Being that the average woman gets a period every month, and the average month consists of 30 days, we mark a woman's personal day 30, day 1 is the day the period begins, as a day of separation and anticipation that the period may begin. This means that if your period begins anywhere from after Shkia on Sunday to before Shkia on a Monday, Monday is day 1. Count out to day 30, so Monday's day 1, Tuesday's day 2, Wednesday's day 3, and so forth. Count out and find day 30, which will actually be 4 weeks and 1 day later, equals a Tuesday. Okay, another way to calculate is if the period begins on a chodesh, in a chodesh malay, a month having 30 days, the Ona Beinanis will always be the day before the Veses HaChodesh date. And if the period begins in a chodesh chaser, a month having only 29 days, it will actually coincide with the date of the Veses HaChodesh, so you get 2 for the price of 1. The Ona Beinanis is actually 24 hours of separation, 2 Onos, night and day, meaning in our example of a period beginning on a Sunday night or Monday, separation will be 4 weeks later on Tuesday, which begins at Shkia on Monday afternoon. So the separation, is being that it's 24 hours, will begin at Shkia on Monday afternoon, and it will continue through Tuesday, and it will end at Shkia on Tuesday afternoon. Okay, 24 hours for the Ona Beinanis. A Badika is required by halacha to be done just before Shkia towards the end of the 24-hour time frame. In our example, Tuesday afternoon before Shkia. Separation is the entire 2 Ona time frame. It is a chumrah, not halachically required, but a chumrah to do a second Badika after nightfall Tuesday night following the 24 hours of separation after Tzeis HaKochavim. This is to ensure that no period began in the time between sunset and nightfall, which is called Bein Hashmashos. The Ona Beinanis is never carried forward. A new Ona Beinanis is calculated from each new flow. Therefore, a woman who has a shorter span between her cycles may never get to day 30. As soon as she gets a new cycle, she has a new day 30 counting from the start of the newest period. The day 30 calculated from a previous cycle is canceled. While certainly the husband should be informed about every Ona of separation, for the Ona Beinanis, this actually needs to be verbally expressed. A woman must inform her husband that it was the Ona Beinanis and that a Badika was done and the result of that Badika. If she fails to inform him, he actually is required to ask. Intimacy may not resume unless a Badika is done for the Ona Beinanis, even if it's forgotten for many days. The Badika should be performed as soon as she remembers. If intimacy mistakenly took place without a Badika being done, please consult the Rav on how to be metaken to correct this error. The third way that we calculate and anticipate the Veses HaChodesh is called the Veses HaFloga. This is the interval cycle. According to the Alter Rebbe, we calculate the interval of blood-free onos, each day has 2, between the Hefsek Tahara of one period to the start of the next period, inclusive. We include that ona that the period begins on. Therefore, we can only have a Hafloga calculated as once we have 2 periods, at least. The count for the Hafloga is a count of onos, not days. And remember, each day has 2 onos, night ona and day ona. The count begins with the first ona immediately following the successful Hefsek Tahara. Since the Hefsek Tahara must be completed before sunset, the first ona immediately following it is the night ona of day 1 of Sheva Neki'im. It's important to make note and remember that the day the Hefsek Tahara is performed is day 0 in reference to the count of the Sheva Neki'im. It is never included in the count of the 7 days. They begin the next day, okay? So, for example, a period A begins on Monday, anywhere from after Shkia Sunday afternoon to before Shkia on Monday afternoon. The Hefsek Tahara is done on Friday, day 5 of the cycle before Shkia. And even though it is perfectly normal to have a period that lasts longer than 5 days, we're just doing this for example's sake. Period B begins the next month on a Sunday on the day ona. To calculate the Hafloga between the 2 cycles, we immediately go back to the Hefsek Tahara that was performed on Friday. Beginning with day 1 of the Sheva Neki'im, which is Shabbos, we count each day by 2s, 2 onos per day, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and so forth. And we end our count on the day ona of Sunday, the day that the period began, period B began, and we include that ona, that day ona. This gives us a count of 46 onos. This tells us that period B began on the 46th Hafloga ona. 46 is the Hafloga number created by the count of onos between the Hefsek Tahara of period A to the start of period B. To calculate the actual date we need to separate for Hafloga 46, we will need to wait until we are able to perform a successful Hefsek Tahara. The Hefsek Tahara for period B, day 1 is Sunday, is successfully completed before Shkia on Thursday, day 5 of the cycle. Beginning with the first day of Sheva Neki'im, in this case it is on Friday, we count by 2s. Friday is 2, Shabbos is 4, Sunday is 6, and so forth, and we end our count on ona 46. This will be a day ona, and we mark this ona as ona 46 for the Hafloga ona to separate. The separation for the Veses HaFloga is 1 ona only, night or day, depending on when the period began that created this ona of separation. Counting in this manner will always give you an odd number indicating a night ona of separation and an even number indicating a day ona of separation, because we start the count with the night ona, which is 1, day is 2, night is 3, day is 4. So the nights are always odd, and the days are always even. A Badika is required to be done just after the time the period began that created this ona, but before the end of the ona. Example, if the period on ona 46 began at 10 a.m., then a Badika should be done after 10 a.m., but before sunset on the 46th ona, counting from the newest Hefsek Tahara. And again, if the Badika was not done, a Rav should be consulted. First time it happens, ask if you may rely on this Pesach if it happens in the future again. Please remember that the separation continues throughout the entire ona, sunrise to sunset on ona 46, even if the Badika is done earlier and is clear. Hafloga numbers are canceled only by a period that begins on a larger Hafloga number. So when you get your period and you calculate the Hafloga ona upon which the new period began, you then look at all active Hafloga numbers that are on your calendar. Any numbers that are lower than the number created by the newest cycle are canceled. Any numbers that are larger than the newest number are retained. However, the date to separate for each of those active numbers will be recalculated from each new Hefsek Tahara. Example, period B begins on Hafloga 46. Once the Hefsek Tahara is successfully completed before Shkia for period B, We count out the onos, beginning with the first day of Sheva Nekim. Counting by twos, we reach Ona 46. We mark Ona 46 as a time of separation. Period C begins on Ona 44. Since 44 is lower than 46, it does not cancel out the 46. So now there are two active Hafloga numbers on the calendar. Once the Hefsek Tahara is successfully completed before Shkia for period C, we then count out and mark, beginning with day 1 of the Sheva Nekim following this Hefsek Tahara, and we mark out both Hafloga Ona 44 and Ona 46 as the Hafloga Onos to separate. 44 being a lower number does not uproot the higher number of 46. Now, if period D begins on Hafloga 45, the lower 44 will be uprooted and canceled, but the larger 46 will remain to be moved forward to a new date, counting from the newest Hefsek Tahara. To summarize, when the new period begins, any Hafloga numbers on your calendar that are lower than the number created by the newest period are canceled. Any higher numbers are kept, and they recalculate to new dates counting from the newest Hefsek Tahara. Any calculations based on a previous Hefsek Tahara are no longer relevant, meaning if you had a Hafloga 46 that fell on the 6th of Cheshvan based on an earlier Hefsek, once you do a new Hefsek from the new period, the 6th of Cheshvan will no longer be relevant, even though the number 46 is kept. It will move forward to a new date, counting from the newest Hefsek Tahara. Remember, therefore, that it is entirely normal and common to have more than one Hafloga numbers on your calendar at any given time. Separation for the Vesas Hafloga is one Ona, night or day, for each active Hafloga number on your calendar. The Badika is performed just after the time the period began that created this Ona, but before the end of the Ona. Now, remember in the last class, I said that one may establish a Kavua with the Hafloga Ona. Let me quickly explain. A Kavua can be established if someone has a period that begins on the same Hafloga Ona 3 times in a row. So if you have 3 periods in a row that begin on 46, you can establish a Kavua for Hafloga 46. However, Kavua can also be established for Hafloga with cycles that are not consecutive as well. If someone has a period begin on Ona 46 in Tishrei, then it begins on Ona 43 in Cheshvan, and then it begins on Ona 39 in Kislev, and then in Teves, it again begins on 46. The new 46 cancels out the 2 lower numbers in between, and she now has 2 that began on 46. Then she has 41 in Shvat, 45 in Adar, and in Nisan, again it begins on Ona 46. The new 46 again cancels out those numbers in between that were lower, and now gives her a third 46, and this can establish a Kavua of Hafloga 46. We can also establish a Veses Hadilug with the Hafloga Ona. So if period A begins on Ona 46, period B on 44, period C on 42, a Veses Hadilug of a descending pattern going down by 2 Onos can establish a Veses Hadilug. 3 will establish a Lechumra, 4 to establish it Lakula, and it can be in either direction, ascending or descending, and in any increments, 1, 2, 5, or 10. I hope that you enjoyed this class. I look forward to seeing you again next week for the next session in the calendar on Onas Haveses. You may view this and any previous sessions online at any time at mikvah.org/power hour, one word. Good night and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Klein. For our next topic in Kashrus, tonight we will go through an important topic that many people often have questions about: understanding hashgachas and knowledge that will help you to be an educated consumer. We are grateful to have back with us tonight Rabbi Nissan Zibel. Rabbi Zibel is the Kashrus administrator at the RCF, the Rabbinate of Central Florida, and delivers classes to the general public on various kashrus topics. He is also highly active in answering consumers' kashrus questions on a daily basis. Thank you very much for being part of our program again.
Thank you very much for having me, and a good evening. So as mentioned, we're going to be covering the topic of understanding hashgachas. There was just 1 or 2 points that I believe is important that we didn't cover last week in last week's topic, which was post-Pesach purchases, which I think if we could take a few minutes at the beginning of this class to finish that off, and then from there we'll go into this week's class. So one important topic was that basically you could have a store which was a frum store, frum owner, and he sold his chametz and everything was done properly, and still in his store he's selling things that are chametz she'avar lav Pesach, chametz that past Pesach and is absolutely forbidden for a yid to consume. Unfortunately, many times this happens. I'm referring to specifically in liquor stores. You could have a frum liquor store owned by a frum yid, and he sold his chametz, but certain items on the shelf have an issue. How could they have an issue if he sold his chametz? The issue is because those bottles of liquor were produced by a Jewish company, and they passed Pesach when they were aging, and afterwards they ended up on the shelf, and it could just look like a very simple bottle of bourbon, but truly be chametz she'avar lav Pesach, and this is very common. There are many, many brands. There's a big company called the Sazerac company that's pretty large and distills many types of alcohol, but primarily bourbon, and it is Jewish owned, and they do not sell their chametz on Pesach, and therefore anything that's produced by them is chametz she'avar lav Pesach, and you cannot buy it, you cannot benefit from it, and unfortunately people are not aware of that. A famous one that many people know is Buffalo Trace, but there are other ones as well, bourbons that are produced by this company. A graphic did go out, it could be with the last class, will be put with this class maybe, of some examples of these different types of bourbons. Now, one may ask, usually if you wait a bit, the product runs out and you could buy it. So why isn't that the case for this bourbon? So the reason why it's different about this bourbon is because this bourbon is aged for a while, and at all points, basically all barrels of bourbon all went through a Pesach without being sold. Because it takes a while for bourbon to age, all bourbon that ends up being put on the market went through a Pesach while it was aging and was not sold. And therefore, once that happens, it doesn't matter how many months pass, that Isser remains, and it's again forbidden not just to benefit from, to eat, but even to benefit from. So that's something which is to make an awareness. At times, it can just look like a simple mashke, and the frum owner, he sold the store, but still, there could be stuff sold there that were not sold properly, or not sold, and therefore are usher. In regards to someone may say, if so, do we have to start looking to every product? Maybe it was produced by a yid. Maybe they produced it on Pesach. To what extent? So there obviously are millions and millions of products. It would be not realistic to start looking to every owner of every product on the market. So there is a limit, because again, we're dealing with a knas d'Rabbanan, to what extent one has to do it. But obviously, when something is known to the public, a very big owner of liquor company is Jewish, that's different, and we're aware of it. One more thing is that we know that Alter Rebbe has a very different, not different, but a very secure system of how to sell chametz with an Arav Kabbalah, with something guaranteeing the sale. We're not going to get into details of that. That's a whole class for itself. But that makes the sale absolutely a real sale and very, very certain. So a person may wonder, after Pesach, can I only buy chametz from someone that also sold with this sale, like the Alter Rebbe proves, or the Alter Rebbe prescribes of Arav Kabbalah? What if you go to many restaurants or many stores, or they're not selling their chametz according to the Alter Rebbe? Does that mean now we consider it not sold for Pesach and you can't benefit from it? So the answer to that is, as long as they sold their chametz with a proper frum rav that's familiar with the process of selling chametz, and they did it right according to that rav's approach, they did their part and sold their chametz. In such a case, the chachamim are not giving them a knas, are not giving them this penalty that their chametz becomes aser, because as discussed in the last class, this was all a penalty for somebody that did not take care of their chametz properly. If someone did take care of it properly and sold it properly with a rav, it's taken care of. It doesn't affect the chametz. The chametz is perfectly fine after Pesach, and one does not have to start avoiding chametz that was not sold exactly the way the Alter Rebbe prescribes, but as long as it was sold by a proper rav, they're fine. But obviously for yourself, you want to make sure it's sold properly according to what the Alter Rebbe recommends. If somebody ended up buying something by mistake, which was sold, which was not sold over Pesach, and they have chametz now on their property, that's chametz she'avar lo Pesach, if they're allowed to return it to the store to get a refund, it's a big discussion in halacha, and one should reach out to the Rav. Different approaches, different rabbanim have different approaches, because it could be an issue returning it and getting money back for it. It's also a form of benefit. Some say no, it's not. It's just canceling the original acquisition. It's a long discussion, and we're not going to get into it. But if someone is in such a situation, they should ask the Rav how to go about. Fine. Now for this week's topic, which we are covering, understanding hashgachas. When discussing hashgachas, many terms could be thrown around. If you may hear someone saying Haimish hashgacha, or Hasidish hashgacha, or national hashgacha, is this hashgacha to a high standard? Is it Mahadrin? Is it Chabad hashgacha? There could be so many terms used, and what we're trying to do tonight is to give clarity on these different terms and what hashgacha means, and what these different what these different terms could signify to someone who's trying to be careful. We're not going to be naming specific hashgachas, but going into the general education of what these terms could mean. So, just to start off, that however strict or however good the name of hashgacha may sound, it's only a name that was chosen by the hashgacha and is not a real rating. So even if they call themselves AAA+++, world's most Mahadrin hashgacha, that's the name they chose. And even if it has a lot of fancy Hebrew letters and all that, that will not make the hashgacha any valuable, right? Just like a mechanic down the road that decides to call himself New York City's #1 mechanic doesn't mean he's actually that. So the name the hashgacha chooses to give itself, or the look, it may look very professional and a very nice symbol, that doesn't play anything in deciding what hashgacha is. At times you'll say, what do you mean? Look at this. There's so many Hebrew words, and it says Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin, and Rav Agoin, and Av Bezdin, and there's so much words and titles, but none of that plays a role in giving hashgacha any validity whatsoever. And it's obviously purely the hashgacha choosing that, so they could choose what they want and how they want. That would not be a way to judge hashgacha, or to even know that if it's a reliable hashgacha or not. Just to put that out there. And even therefore, if we're going to explain what a Haimish hashgacha is, doesn't mean now that all Haimish hashgachas are good. Even if someone calls himself and say we are a top tier Haimish hashgacha, that's what they're saying. But we're just explaining tonight the idea of what Haimish hashgacha should be striving for. And if there is a Haimish hashgacha out there that's actually properly following that, then yes. But if not. I mean, and how do you find that out? By being in touch with kashrut professionals that are, that are involved and understand and know the realities and the updates of what's going on in the kashrut world. So, in America, in Israel, there's different terms used. There's Mahadrin and non-Mahadrin, or Badat. There's different levels, and we had a whole discussion of that in our class when we discussed kashrus in Eretz Yisrael, which we had a whole dedicated classes for that. So that's there. In America, the general terms that are used for hashgachas is it a Haimish hashgacha or is it a national hashgacha? Those are the general terms, and then people will use their own words, their own terms, but those are the general terms used in the kashrus world. Is it a Haimish hashgacha or a national hashgacha? What's the difference? The big difference is in their, first of all, their clientele, and as well as their primary focus of what needs to be adhered to strictly and very carefully. So a national hashgacha, which you can just tell by its name, its clientele is national, which means it's there for the entire United States of America. It's there on a national level. You should be able to walk into any store anywhere in America, any Walmart, anything, and find products that are kosher certified. So a Jew anywhere at any point nationally in the USA or similar in Canada, we're not trying to exclude Canada, a similar idea, will be able to walk into any store anywhere in that nation and find certified products, whether it's various breads or cookies or peanut butter or jam or oils or mayonnaise, vinegar, or tuna, whatever it is. Someone can go into a store and fill up a shopping cart with many, many things that are certified by these national hashgachas, and they look at it as a chrais, a responsibility, which it isn't a special responsibility, to make kosher food available across the nation. And obviously, for that to be a reality, at times, not every single last detail halachically will be kept, and they obviously have their own poskim and batedinim that will sit down and discuss and decide for the hashgacha which areas you could be more lenient to make kosher food available on a national level, which areas you cannot. There's a red line, you cannot cross this red line. And there are general national accepted standards. So in America, it's nationally accepted to be okay to certify milk, which is not Chalav Yisrael. However, or America, Canada, and other places, in comparison to Eretz Yisrael, just giving an example, in Eretz Yisrael, even the basic standard of Rabbanut, they hold you cannot certify milk that's not Chalav Yisrael. They make a difference for milk powder, whatever, that's a separate. So there's a national standard that the general hashgachas there, the national hashgachas will adhere to. They'll be fine at certifying non-Chalav Yisrael milk. They'll now these days, for example, national hashgachas have agreed that they will not certify non-galat meat. Although according to halacha, you could find very strong reasons to approve non-galat meat for basic kosher at least, but that became a standard. So they'll have, based on their beis din and poskim, and based on generally accepted national standards, what's considered an accepted standard, what's considered substandard, and that together is what defines what they're going to do. So where are they extra careful? Where do they put all their investment and adherence? It's to being extra professional and systematic and having a professional team and being on top of every single last detail, and enforcement and visitations by professional mashgichim that understand chemistry, that understand have every last detail of the way machinery works and be able to know how to kasher things properly. So they really adhere to that. That's where will be extra machmir, to be extra knowledgeable in those areas. That's where they're mahader. They'll tell you we are mahader in kashrus, but we're mahader in ABC, making sure to be the top when it comes to systems and enforcement and trained mashgichim and professional mashgichim. That's where they'll invest and be extra careful. When it comes to the halachic standards, they will rely on their beis din and poskim and whatever and national standards, and that will be their guide. And together with that, they'll make many products available on a national level. Now, that doesn't mean that every single product will be to the highest halachic standard. It will be to a high standard that they feel is considered reliable. That's for sure. Whatever their poskim told them, whatever their Rav said they can do, it will be exactly that. They're not gonna, by mistake, do less because they sent the wrong mashgiach, or sent someone who doesn't understand chemistry and misunderstood something. So they can be extra careful to follow exactly what they're told by their beis din to the T. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be the highest standard when it comes to following all the opinions of halacha that may have a stricter opinion, stricter approach. So for somebody who's looking to be following a stricter halachic approach, they may not be comfortable with all the halachic standards that are being upheld by these national hashgachas. And generally, when we say national hashgachas, the big five are, let's say, the OU, the OK, the Chav K, the Star K, CRC Chicago. Those are the big five, and there's other ones as well, smaller ones, which exist. There are obviously other national hashgachas out there that at least claim to be national, to be catering to national standard, which may not be as good or as reliable due to a lack of proper system, or not having proper staff, and many other reasons that could make hashgacha be weak, especially in its enforcement and properly establishing their standards. So based on their clientele, which their clientele is national, Jews across the nation should have to have access. Their goal, therefore, is to try to make that a reality. So something's going to have to go, and that will be accepting lower halachic standards, still set in stone by their poskim in this and by national standards, and that's how they make it available. But they will be very strict when it comes to enforcement and all that. When it comes to Haimish Ashgacha, their clientele is very different. The Haimish Ashgacha's clientele is Haimish Yidden, which means very frum Yidden, Charedim, Chassidish Yidden, a very frum crowd, which is looking for only the highest halachic standards and is not looking for any leniencies or for any heterim, even if it was paskin by a very big paisik or by a very important beis din. They want whatever says in Shulchan Aruch to the strictest opinion. This is what we want. And they're not looking for their products to be found nationally. They want their products to be found in Borough Park and in Lakewood and in Crown Heights and wherever, Muncie, wherever the frum Heimische communities are, and that's their clientele. And it's a very, very different ballgame. And therefore, they could come with more. They don't have to in any way be lowering any halachic standards. They're coming in with full halachic demands and standards. And generally speaking, if it's a strong professional Haimish Ashgacha, they're also going to be very careful with the mashgichim they send and the professionality and their systems and how everything's properly overkept and enforced and implemented. All that's going to also be done properly. But at times, the focus becomes so much the halachic standards that some Haimish Ashgachas may end up not being the strongest in the enforcement aspect or in the systems aspect, in the professionality aspect, and that's where things may lack. And the mashgichim sending out there may not be familiar with the newest engineered machines or with the newest things on how that are being done with certain chemicals, and you have to understand chemistry to understand it. So doesn't mean that if you can't have both, you could have both, and there are Haimish Ashgachas that are doing both to the highest standard. But at the same time, there are at times some Haimish Ashgachas that lose a little bit of the enforcement aspect of the system aspect because of how much focus there is on the halachic standard and at time that gives, and therefore just because something is a Haimish Ashgacha and does special runs and all that, that does not mean that it will actually be up there. This is where we get into the words, the difference between systems and standards. So standards at the end of the day is on paper. On paper, they're going to say Chalav Yisrael, Pas Yisrael, Bishul Yisrael, Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin to the highest level, the highest standard, and it's all going to be the most beautiful things. But practically speaking, if you're sending a mashgiach to a factory that never saw machinery, doesn't understand engineering and how machinery is made, he won't understand how to properly kasher that machine. And if he thinks he does, and he's not properly trained, he made that product maybe 100% treif. So the system is crucial. System means, again, the enforcement or the implementation or whatever the system of how the product actually has those standards is extremely crucial, and otherwise you can be in a big mess. Now, one more thing for the Haimish Ashgachas is that many times they're catering to a specific community. So if it's a Chassidish Ashgacha, Chassidish communities at times will not, or generally, based on a Kabbalah from the Baal Shem Tov, they're not going to be careful with to only eat yashan. Although luckily there's very little basis to be eating something that's not yashan, but there's a tradition by Chassidim and generally Chassidish, even though they're keeping all the highest chumras, when it comes to yashan, they're not going to guarantee it's for sure yashan, because for their community is not careful with that. So even if it is Haimish Ashgacha, doesn't always mean that in every area of halacha are they checking off to the highest, because for their community, the community doesn't really care so much about that aspect. Or if it's a Sephardic Ashgacha, they may have to keep a few extra chumras, Bishul Beis Yosef or Yashan or Beit Yosef clean lungs for the animal, they're going to have to keep certain high standards for the community, and they may have some leniencies for the community if it's Kitnius or Pesach, but for they're geared for the community. That is perfect for their community. So at times it could be a very good ashgacha, very solid ashgacha, from Haimish ashgacha, but it's geared towards a certain community. Therefore, it may be doing more or less depending on that. So that's another thing to be aware of. We are already running late, so we're going to stop here for tonight. Thank you very much for having me, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zibel. Okay, let's put a coin in the pushka, and we're going to say the Rebbe's kapitel together with kapitel Chaf for Eretz Yisrael. Shir hamalas habaytchem b'Adonai kahatzion la'yimayit la'elam yeshev. Yerushalayim harim saviv la v'Adonai saviv la'amai mayata v'yad olam. Ki la yanuach shevet haresha al garel hatzadikim laman la yishlucho hatzadikim v'avlasa yadehem. Heitiv Adonai latayvim v'lisharim b'libaisam. V'hamatim akalkalaisam yelichem Adonai es payalei ha'aven shalom al Yisrael. Now let's say together Kapitel Chaf for continued safety in Eretz Yisrael and all over the world. Lamnatseach mizmor LaDavid yancha Adonai b'yayim tzara yisagevcha shem elehei Yaakov. Yishlach ezocha mikaydesh u'mitzion yisadeka. Yizkar kol min chaysecha v'aylascha yedash nesela. Yiten lecha chilvavecha v'chal atzascha yemale. Neranana b'shuasecha v'shem eleheinu nidgal yemale Adonai kol mishalesecha. Ata yadati ki haishi Adonai mashichai yanehu mishmei kadshai b'gvorais yesha yeminai. Ele v'recha ve'ele v'asusim v'anachnu b'shem Adonai eleheinu nazkir. Hey makaru v'nafalu v'anachnu kamnu v'nisaydad Adonai haishia hamelech yaneinu v'yayim karenu. The Mashiach thought for today is from Parshas Emor Tafshin Nun Aleph. There is no need to create the desire within a Yid to fortify himself and to take action to hasten the daybreak of the Geula. All that is needed is to wake him up from his slumbers. Once that is done, there is no doubt that he will do whatever he can to bring about the Geula. Quick reminders. Please consider partnering with us to keep our classes going. We rely on and appreciate all contributions. You can log on to mikvah.org/donate and just make sure to select Project Chana Power Hour in the options so that it goes towards our program. Thank you. If you appreciate these classes, please share them with your friends and family. All playbacks are available on mikvah.org/power hour and also on all podcast platforms as well as 24/6. Search us up as Project Chana Power Hour. If you have questions on the classes or would like to dedicate a week of learning in honor or le'ulei nishma someone, please reach out to us on our email, projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. May our learning prepare us and our homes and bring every Jew home to Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach now. Thank you for joining. Good night.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. As a reminder, you can sponsor our class by reaching out to projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. Please rate and like this episode to help others find the podcast. Tune in next week for another class. Have a wonderful day.